Well, it looks like my friend Andrew Breitbart is continuing to think big. He recently launched Big Journalism. That's the third sibling, joining older sisters Big Hollywood and Big Government. And so this seems as good a time as any to discuss a little of the history and the consequences of the unending bias in what we're calling, with increasingly well-deserved derision, the mainstream media. Now, some of this bias is obvious, but some of it is so shockingly obvious that it can still genuinely leave you with your jaw on the floor, like this, for example.
Well, to reach back to one of our heroes from the past, from the 60s, Saul Alinsky once said that even though both sides have flaws in their arguments, and you can always find something nuanced about your own side you don't like, and it's never perfect, you have to act in the end like there's simple black and white clarity between your side and the other side, or you don't get anything done. I always try to remind myself of Saul Alinsky when I get confused.
Now, Chris Matthews, of course, felt the thrill run up his leg whenever Obama spoke. He said it's his job as a journalist to make sure that the president succeeds, and he referred to West Point as the enemy camp, although he did apologize for that last one, and good on him for doing so. He hasn't apologized for the Alinsky remarks, of course, and he won't, because he can't. This wasn't a slip of the tongue or a poor choice of words. This was core philosophy. It's not the same thing as saying Martin Luther King or John Kennedy were his heroes. Liberals, of course, should have liberal heroes. But it needs to be said, and I will keep saying it, that Saul Alinsky was not just a guy with different ideas on what makes America great. Alinsky and the rest of the Marxist totalitarians that made up the Frankfurt School spent their lives fighting for the overthrow of the American government, the destruction of capitalism — Chris is a millionaire, by the way — and the destruction of religion and the military and democracy and even the rule of law. All of the strategies outlined in Chris Matthews' hero's book, Rules for Radicals, are designed to use non-legal, non-democratic methods to accomplish their goal of a statist takeover of a free people. They could not and they cannot legitimately do this at the polls, and they know it. So they use lies, subterfuge, fraud, intimidation, and did I mention lies? They're big on lies, in order to achieve their sniveling, oppressive, monolithic, gray little communist utopia right here on Main Street, USA. That's Chris Matthews' hero. But hey, it's MSNBC, right? Well, you know, it's not trivial. You throw in the combined audiences of Chris Matthews, Rachel Maddow, Oberman, Ed Schultz, and the rest of them, and you're talking about literally hundreds of people. So it's not a small deal. But there are bigger fish to fry. Now, most people think that this left-leaning press bias is a relatively recent phenomenon, but it's not. And the consequences are not just skewed elections, as if that's not serious enough. That's just political ruin. But the consequences of this left-leaning press bias has cost a lot of people their lives. A lot of people. This man should be known on sight to every American. His name is Walter Duranty, and he was a reporter for the paper of record, that unbiased Olympus of all the news that's fit to print, the gray lady herself, the New York Times. Like Chris Matthews' hero, Saul Alinsky, Duranty thought Marxism was a really swell idea. Hey, he has a right to his opinion, certainly, but for year after year, while reporting for the New York Times from the Soviet Union, Walter Duranty was privy to the mass murder of millions of private Russian farmers known as the kulaks. Stalin, forcing his Marxist collectivism on the Russian people, decided to condemn these kulaks to the most horrible, painful, lingering fate known to mankind. He starved them to death, and Walter Duranty, reporter for the New York Times, knew all about it. These innocent, patriotic Russian farmers, said Duranty, would have to be, quote, liquidated or melted in the hot fire of exile and labor into the proletarian mass, unquote. And if mere exile and labor in the gulags wouldn't bring about the workers' paradise, well then, for those backwards enough to resist the scientific flow of Marxist history, quote, the final fate of such enemies is death, unquote. Now that is a reprehensible and a disgusting philosophy for anyone to hold. But Walter Duranty, like his modern leftist counterparts in the press today, could not simply come out and say what he believed, just as MSNBC's Ed Schultz, whose VU meters in the background remind us that this is the loudest commentary to be had at any price, recently did when he admitted that the current health care bill before Congress would be, quote, a foot in the door, unquote, for the single-payer, socialized health care system that he, Ed Schultz, is in favor of because he won't have to use it, but which is solidly opposed by most Americans. Like Ed, Walter Duranty was a font of failed ideas, but unlike Ed, Walter Duranty was an accessory to one of the greatest mass murders in human history. Durante, you see, not only failed to report on the starvation he was sent to cover, Durante consistently and vehemently denied that such a thing was happening in the workers' paradise. And when other reporters spoke out about the forced starvation in Russia, heroic men, real journalists, like Welsh reporter Gareth Jones of The Times, a British newspaper, Walter Durante called them liars under the New York Times banner and was eventually awarded journalism's top honor, the Pulitzer Prize, as his reward for covering up and defending the mass murder of millions of people in the paper of record. As Durante's hero Joseph Stalin once observed, quote, "A single death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic," unquote. Had the world known about these statistics, something would have been done about them. But New York Times Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Walter Durante made sure that the world did not know. But hey, that was long ago, you say. Okay, well, we all know who this is. This is the late Walter Cronkite, the former most trusted man in America. The current most trusted man in America is leftist comedian Jon Stewart. Here's a clip of a retired Walter Cronkite achieving the Norman Cousins Global Governance Award for his lifelong work in support of one world government.
First, we Americans are going to have to yield up some of our sovereignty. That's going to be, to many, a bitter pill. It would take a lot of courage, a lot of faith, a lot of persuasion to them to come along with us on this necessity. Today, we must develop federal structures on a global level to deal with world problems. We need a system of enforceable world law, a democratic federal world government.
Walter Cronkite held this belief for his entire life, that America needed to submit its national sovereignty to a one world government. How such a body would resolve a conflict between freedom-loving Westerners and Islamic fanatics was never explained because, like most left-wing utopias, it doesn't have to make sense. You just have to believe in it desperately enough. Cronkite was entitled to his opinion, of course, just as Durante was. However, many analysts look back at the Tet Offensive in Vietnam as a crippling defeat for the communists. Even the communists thought so. But Walter Cronkite, the most trusted man in America, who nevertheless wanted America to cease to exist as a political entity, said after Tet that he thought the war was unwinnable. Support for the war fell 30 points virtually overnight, and President Lyndon Johnson was reported to have said that if he's lost Cronkite, he's lost Middle America. Losing Cronkite did mean losing Middle America, which meant losing the war, which meant executions for the millions of freedom-loving Vietnamese, not as individuals, of course, but as just more statistics. Shortly after I did my segment on the atomic bombs, my friend Andrew Klavan said to me in private that I was one of the few people out there still doing real journalism, to which I responded, "Andrew, I thought we were friends. There's no need to insult me to my face." I never went to a place like the Columbia School of Journalism, you see, so I'm still of the opinion that there is something called the truth, which may be gotten at by studying facts, and that these facts stayed more or less the same shape no matter who was presenting them. I never learned, as professional journalists learn, that there is in fact the larger truth, in the service of which facts may be, in fact must be, half suppressed, half told, or just plain invented. And meanwhile, of course, this president, whose history is as unknown as the fundamental integrity of Walter Durante and Walter Cronkite and Katie and Ed and Rachel and Rick and Wolf and all the rest, a man whose personal, travel, medical, and academic records are sealed tight as a drum at the cost of millions of dollars, sits serene in his knowledge that the men and women who got him the job will remain on their leash where they belong, and that the one or two ungrateful, barking, mad dog curs who can't see the beautiful vision will be put down as an example to the others. Hence this White House and its ongoing war on Fox News, the only major organization not feeling serial thrills run up their, pardon the expression, collective legs. Well, Mr. Obama and men and women of the mainstream media, I'm sorry to tell you this, but it's too late. Even 10 years ago, you might have gotten away with it, but Fox News, talk radio, and the internet, places like PJTV and big journalism, will not go away. And if you think it's important to keep this voice in the fight, you can hit the subscribe button right over my head. Freedom isn't free, and neither is freedom of information, but freedom of information will set you free. And despite your best efforts, let me just say this to this president and his street thug advisors: we're not scared of you, and we're not going anywhere.